Now, let us go to the individual stages. Let us start first with the very first process or very first stage, which is called as the glycolysis. Now, again, glycolysis happens in the cytosol of the cytoplasm, which is found outside the mitochondrion or mitochondria. In general, glycolysis happens in a series of 10 steps or 10 reactions. These 10 steps are divided into two phases. The first five steps belong to the energy investment phase or the preparatory phase, and the remaining five steps belong to the energy yielding phase or the energy payoff phase. In general, these are the 10 steps of glycolysis. Now, to sum it up, in the energy investment phase or the first five steps, what happens is that the glucose molecule, which again contains six carbons, is cleaved into two molecules of glyceraldehyde 3-phosphate, which contains three carbons each. In these first five steps, the cleaving makes use of two molecules of ATP. Hence, this is called as energy investment phase because it makes use of ATP molecules. So there is an investment of ATP molecule. Now, in the energy yielding phase or the energy harvesting phase, the two molecules of G3P are just going to undergo a series of chemical reactions, making now in the end two molecules of pyruvates or pyruvic acid, which still contains three carbons each. In the process, no ATP molecule is spent, but has produced 4 ATP molecules and 2 NADH molecules, hence the name energy harvesting or energy yielding phase. Now, tallying of the products from one glucose molecule in glycolysis, it makes two pyruvates or pyruvic acid, two ATP molecules produced through substrate level phosphorylation, and two NADH molecules. Now, why do we only have two net ATP molecules instead of four? It is for the reason that we used or invested two ATP molecules during the first five steps. Therefore, we only have a net of two ATPs or a profit of two ATP molecules. Now we're done with glycolysis. Now, by the way, glycolysis is anaerobic or it happens without the presence of oxygen. Now, let us go to the fermentation. Now, again, if it persists that there is no oxygen, the products of glycolysis will enter now the anaerobic respiration or the fermentation. Okay, still the same with glycolysis, this process happens in the cytosol of the cytoplasm. Fermentation happens in two ways depending on the type of organism. These are the alcohol fermentation and then the lactic acid fermentation. Let us discuss first what alcohol fermentation is. This type of fermentation happens in plants and fungi. And in industry, this fermentation is used to create beers and wines and other food and beverages that we consume. Again, it starts first in glycolysis, wherein a glucose molecule is cleaved into two molecules of pyruvic acid or pyruvates. In the process, there is a net yield of two ATPs and two NADH molecules. Now, if there is still no oxygen, fermentation happens. In this case, this is an alcohol fermentation. In alcohol fermentation, the two pyruvic acids are going to be removed with carbon, specifically in the form of carbon dioxide. One carbon dioxide is removed in every pyruvic acid. Since we have two pyruvic acids, therefore there is a release of two molecules of carbon dioxide. Also, aside from the carboxylation, the molecules are also going to be reduced by the electrons coming from NADH. Since we have two molecules in the process, we also need two molecules of NADH. These two NADH are once oxidized, they go back to the glycolysis. So once they become oxidized in the form of NAD, they go back into the glycolysis, ready again to be reduced into NADH. In the end, the products are in the end of alcohol fermentation, the final products are two molecules of ethanol, which contain two carbons each. Now, this is the alcohol that we drink from the alcoholic beverages such as wines and beers. Also, another application of this is in baking bread. When we bake bread, we put yeasts to live in the bread. Yeasts undergo alcoholic fermentation since they are fungi, and in the process, they release carbon dioxide. This release of carbon dioxide now makes the bread rise. Since carbon dioxide is a gas, once it is heated, it expands, making now the bread rise. Overall, these are the products of alcohol fermentation. There is a net of two ATP molecules produced in glycolysis through substrate level phosphorylation. There's also a release of two molecules of carbon dioxide, and there is a production of two molecules of ethanol. And again, this is from one molecule of glucose. Now let us go to the lactic acid fermentation. This type of fermentation happens to animals. And this is the reason why we get muscle sores after a workout or after a heavy work. Or in Filipino, or I mean in Bisaya, this is called as tipamaol. Again, after glycolysis, if there is no oxygen and if the organism is an animal, its cell will undergo lactic acid fermentation. Now, what will happen is that the 2-pyruvic acid or the 2 pyruvates are reduced by the electrons coming from NADH. Since we have 2 pyruvic molecules, we also need 2 NADH molecules. These 2 NADH molecules are oxidized, and once oxidized, they go back. Okay, they go back to glycolysis, ready to be reduced again into NADH, so that it makes now the process efficient. In the end, two lactic acids are formed. And this lactic acid is what clumps up in our muscle cells when we do workout. Since this is acidic, it causes now the burning sensation that we feel, but eventually this pain is eliminated after a few days because this process or this is process or this process is going to be reversed by our body. So the lactic acid is going to be eliminated. Now, in general, in lactic acid fermentation, there is a net yield of 2 ATPs produced again in glycolysis through substrate level phosphorylation and 2 molecules of lactic acids. Again, these are the products of fermentation coming from one glucose molecule. Now, this is the end for the anaerobic respiration or fermentation.